The air was heavy that evening, the kind of heat that settled on a man's shoulders and refused to let go. Dust rolled in slow spirals across the town square, kicked up by wagon wheels and boots that carried the weight of men who had nothing to lose. A wooden platform had been raised against the side of the courthouse, its crude boards hammered together in haste but sturdy enough to hold what they planned. And at the center of it all, bound by rope and flanked by two armed men, stood a boy no older than 15. His eyes darted like a wild animal caught in a trap, searching the crowd for any sign of mercy. There was none. They called it an auction, but everyone knew what it really was. Flesh being sold to pay debts that could never be collected. The boy's father had died in the mines, crushed beneath a timber too heavy to move. His mother followed soon after, her body unable to bear the sickness that came with widowhood and hunger. That left the boy Samuel Cole the only thing of value in the eyes of the men who ran this county. And tonight, they would sell him like cattle to whichever bidder carried the heaviest purse. It was business, they said. Justice, a way of keeping order in hard times. But even the hardest times couldn't justify what they were about to do. Among the crowd stood a man who had seen too much of the world to be surprised, but not so much that he could stomach what he saw. His name was Colt McAllister, though most folks just called him the Cowboy, as if the title alone was enough to explain him. He wasn't a rancher, not anymore. He didn't belong to any one place or people. He drifted from town to town, carrying with him only a rifle, a worn saddlebag, and a silence that made other men uneasy. Colt had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than a blade, and tonight he let it hang around him like armor as he watched the scene unfold. The man leading the auction was Sheriff Boone, a broad-shouldered brute with a voice that carried like thunder. Boone wasn't a lawman in any true sense of the word. He wore the badge, but he served the men who paid him, the same men seated on the front benches now, their boots polished, their faces shadowed beneath wide hats, their eyes cold with the confidence of wealth. They were the cattle barons, the bankers, the men who owned the land and the people on it. Boone was their hound, snapping at whoever they pointed him toward. "Gentlemen," Boone called, lifting his hand for silence, though the crowd had already fallen quiet. "What we got here tonight is a matter of debt. Young Samuel Cole owes this county near $20 in unpaid levies. Now, since he ain't got the means to pay, we're left with only one choice. This boy will be indentured to the highest bidder, his service guaranteed until the debt is cleared. The law is the law." A murmur rippled through the crowd, not of protest, but of calculation. Some were here to watch, some to gawk, and a few to bid. And every one of them knew that $20 was no small sum. A boy could work 10 years and never pay it back. Whoever bought him tonight wouldn't just be buying his labor, they'd be buying his life. Colt shifted his weight, his eyes fixed on the boy. He saw the rope burns at Samuel's wrists. The dirt streaked across his face where tears had fallen and dried. He saw the way the boy tried to stand tall, though his knees trembled beneath him. Something inside Colt stirred, not anger, not yet, but a memory of another place, another time, when he'd been too late to stop a cruelty just like this one. The past had teeth, and tonight, it bit down hard. "Let's start the bidding at $5, Boone announced, his grin splitting wide as he looked toward the bankers in the front row. "Do I hear 5? A hand went up. 5, 6, 7. The numbers climbed slow but steady, each man raising his hand with the casual ease of someone purchasing a tool, not a soul. Boone's voice carried each bid across the square, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the sale. Colt felt his jaw tighten. He told himself to walk away. This wasn't his fight. The county was rotten to its core, and one man wasn't going to cleanse it. But then he heard the boy's voice, raw and desperate, cutting through the heat like a knife. "Please," Samuel whispered, his words barely audible over the sheriff's call. "Somebody, don't let them take me." Colt's hand dropped to his side, brushing against the weight of the revolver that hung at his hip. He didn't remember deciding. It wasn't a plan, not yet. It was instinct, bone deep and unshakable. He stepped forward, boots echoing against the wooden planks as the crowd parted in uneasy silence. Boone's grin faltered as he recognized the man approaching. Colt McAllister wasn't known for making trouble, but when he did, it was the kind of trouble that stuck in a man's memory. "Well now," Boone drawled, though his voice carried a strain it hadn't before. "Looks like we got ourselves another bidder. You got money, McAllister?" Colt stopped at the edge of the platform, his gaze never leaving the boy. "Not for sale," he said, his voice low but clear enough for every man present to hear. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Boone's face darkened. "What do you say?" "I said," Colt repeated, lifting his eyes at last to meet the sheriff's. "The boy's not for sale." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Boone barked a laugh, loud and mean. "You got no say here, cowboy. Law's the law. If you don't got silver, you best keep your mouth shut." Colt stepped up onto the platform, his boots thudding against the boards. The armed men flanking Samuel stiffened, their hands twitching near their rifles. But Colt didn't reach for his gun, not yet. He stood tall, his shadow cutting across the boy like a shield. "The law," Colt said slowly, "ain't a rope around a child's neck, ain't a hammer driving nails into coffins. Law's supposed to protect the weak. What you're doing here, it ain't law. It's theft. It's murder with paperwork." The crowd shifted, uneasy now, whispers buzzing like hornets. Boone's grin was gone, replaced by a hard, flat line. "That so?" he asked. His hand drifted toward the revolver on his hip. "Then maybe you ought to remind yourself what happens to men who spit on this county's law." Colt didn't move. His eyes were steady, his voice calm, but his words carried the weight of iron. Maybe it's time this county remembered what happens when good men stop looking away. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Boone's hand dropped to his gun. The first shot split the night like thunder. The sound of that first gunshot rolled through the town like a storm breaking, echoing off wooden walls and rattling glass in the windows. For an instant, no one moved. Then chaos exploded. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and thick, as Boone staggered back with a curse. His gun had fired too soon, the bullet slamming into the wooden post just inches from Samuel's bound hands. Colt's revolver was still in its holster. He hadn't drawn. Not yet. The crowd gasped, voices rising in fear and anger, but the cowboy's stance never wavered. The two guards beside Samuel raised their rifles, hesitation flickering across their faces. Boone roared at them, spittle flying from his mouth. "What are you waiting for? Shoot him!" That was the moment Colt moved. His hand blurred, faster than thought, and the crack of his revolver split the night. One guard fell, his rifle clattering against the platform. The second stumbled back, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had torn through. Samuel flinched, eyes wide, but Colt stepped in front of him, steady and unshaken, his revolver leveled at Boone. "This auction's closed," Colt said, his voice flat as iron. The crowd surged with panic, boots scraping against the dirt as people shoved each other to get clear. Mothers grabbed children, men ducked behind wagons, and the wealthy bidders in the front row scrambled like rats, their hats tumbling into the dust. The air was filled with shouts and curses, the thud of feet, the crash of benches overturned in the rush. Boone's face twisted with rage. He drew his pistol fully this time, but Colt's second shot knocked it clean from his hand. The sheriff howled, clutching his fingers where the bullet had grazed him. Colt didn't lower his gun. "You're finished, Boone," Colt said. "Take one more step, and you won't get another chance." Behind him, Samuel's breathing came in quick, ragged gasps. The boy's eyes darted from Colt to the fleeing crowd, then back again, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. The rope bit into his wrists as he pulled, desperate to be free. Colt holstered his revolver, quick as the draw had been. With one hard jerk of his knife, he sliced through the ropes binding the boy. Samuel stumbled forward, rubbing his raw wrists, his chest heaving. "Stick close to me," Colt muttered, eyes never leaving Boone. Boone's men, scattered through the crowd, began to regroup. Half a dozen guns glinted in the lantern light as they pushed through the panicked townsfolk. Boone's voice rose above the noise, harsh and commanding. "Don't just stand there! Put him down!" Colt shoved Samuel behind him as the first of the hired guns raised a rifle. Another shot cracked, splintering the wooden railing beside Colt's head. He grabbed the boy and leapt from the platform, hitting the ground hard and rolling behind a water trough. Bullets tore into the boards above, showering them both with splinters. The boy's voice was a frantic whisper. "We can't stay here." "We won't." Colt cut him off, checking the chambers of his revolver. 3 bullets left. Not enough. The din of the crowd was fading now. Most townsfolk scattering into alleys or bolting for home. But Boone's men were closing in, their boots heavy on the dirt, their voices snarling curses as they fanned out around the square. Colt peered over the trough. He could see them shadows moving through smoke, the gleam of rifles catching lantern light. They weren't amateurs. Boone had paid for men who knew how to kill. "On my word," Colt told Samuel, his voice low but steady. "You run for that alley by the blacksmith shop. You keep low, you keep moving, and you don't stop until I tell you." The boy shook his head, eyes wide with terror. "What about you? I'll be right behind." Colt lied. A shadow loomed, and Colt fired. The gunman crumpled into the dust. Another rushed forward, and Colt met him head-on, slamming the butt of his revolver into the man's jaw with a sickening crack. The boy whimpered, his hands over his ears as another volley of shots split the night. "Go!" Colt barked. Samuel ran. The boy darted into the alley, his small frame vanishing into the darkness just as bullets tore into the wall where he'd been. Colt moved fast, zigzagging through the square, drawing fire away from the boy. His revolver barked twice more, and 2 men fell. The last shot clicked empty, the sound sharp as a death knell. Colt dove into the alley, breath ragged, boots pounding against the dirt. He could hear Samuel ahead, the boy's footsteps quick and light. Shouts followed behind them, Boone's voice above them all, howling like a wounded animal. "Run him down! Don't let that bastard leave this town alive!" The alleys twisted, narrow and dark, lined with barrels and crates that reeked of rot. Colt grabbed Samuel's arm, yanking him into a side passage, just as 3 gunmen stormed past. They pressed themselves against the wall, breath shallow, waiting for the boots to fade. Samuel trembled, his voice a broken whisper. "Why'd you do it? Why'd you stop them?" Colt's eyes were cold in the darkness. "Because no one else would." The boy swallowed hard, his face pale and streaked with grime. In that moment, he looked younger than 15, younger than a child ought to look when men had already tried to sell his life away. Voices echoed from the main street, angry, searching, growing closer. Colt knew they couldn't stay hidden long. Boone had numbers, and he'd use them. The cowboy's reputation had bought him a few seconds of fear, but fear burned quick, and soon enough, bullets would come again. "We head for the stables," Colt said. "Need horses if we're getting out." Samuel nodded, though his legs shook. They slipped through the alleys, keeping to shadows, moving quick but careful. Colt's hand never left his holster, though the revolver sat empty now. It was a bluff, but sometimes a bluff could buy as much as a bullet. When they reached the livery, the night was quiet, save for the restless snort of horses. Colt led Samuel inside, motioning for silence. They moved past the stalls, the smell of hay thick in the air, until Colt found what he needed: 2 saddled horses left by men too panicked to finish their drinks at the saloon. But as Colt reached for the reins, a voice slid out of the shadows, low and cold. "Going somewhere, cowboy?" Boone stepped into the lantern light, a rifle cradled in his good hand. Blood still seeped from his grazed fingers, but his grin was wide and feral. Behind him, 6 men fanned out, rifles gleaming. Colt and Samuel were boxed in. The boy froze, his chest heaving, his back pressed against Colt's side. Boone leveled the rifle, his eyes glinting with cruel delight. "You made yourself a hero tonight, McAllister, but heroes die just the same as anyone else." Colt's hand hovered near his revolver, though he knew the chambers were empty. His eyes narrowed, his voice steady. "Maybe, but I don't die alone." The standoff stretched, the air taut with violence about to break. Boone's men raised their rifles in unison, the metallic clicks of hammers pulled back, filling the silence. Samuel whimpered, his small hand clutching Colt's coat. And then, from outside the stable came the sound of hooves, dozens of them. The ground trembled. The horses in their stalls whinnied in panic. Boone's grin faltered, his eyes darting toward the doors. The sound grew louder, closer, a thunder of hooves that shook the very earth. Boone's men shifted uneasily, their rifles wavering. Colt's eyes narrowed. Whatever was coming, it wasn't Boone's doing. The doors of the stable burst open, lantern lights spilling into the night. And there, framed against the darkness, rode men and women in buckskin and feathers, their faces painted, their horses wild and restless. A voice rang out, fierce and unyielding. "The boy is not yours to take, nor is the man." Boone's eyes widened. For the first time that night, the sheriff looked afraid. For a moment, no one moved. The stables, thick with dust and smoke, trembled under the weight of hooves outside. Boone's grin faltered, and the rifles of his men dipped, uncertainty sweeping through them like a cold wind. Colt kept his hand near the empty revolver, eyes fixed on the riders who had appeared like spirits summoned by the earth itself. They sat astride painted horses, feathers whipping in the wind, faces streaked with red and black. The one at the front, tall, proud, with scars across his cheeks, spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of 100 battles. "The boy belongs to his people, and you, cowboy." His gaze lingered on Colt, hard but not hostile. "You drew steel when no one else dared. You are not alone tonight." Boone spat into the dirt, fury overtaking fear. "This is my town, my law. You've got no right." The warrior's horse reared, hooves lashing the air, and Boone's words died on his lips. His men shuffled, torn between loyalty and terror, their rifles twitching like nervous fingers. Colt seized the moment. With a swift motion, he grabbed Samuel's arm and hauled him onto the nearest horse. The boy clung to the saddle, his thin arms trembling, his eyes locked on the warriors who had come for him. Colt swung up behind, the leather creaking under his weight. Boone roared, his voice breaking, "Shoot them! Shoot them both!" But his men hesitated. Some lowered their rifles entirely, unwilling to invite the wrath of the painted riders. A few stepped back, their courage failing as the circle of warriors tightened around the stable. Colt leaned close to Samuel, his voice low. "Hold on tight." With a sharp kick, he spurred the horse forward. The animal surged, muscles straining, and burst through the line of Boone's men. The warriors parted just enough to let him through, their cries rising in the night, a chorus of defiance. Gunfire split the air, wild and desperate. Bullets tore past, splintering wood, striking sparks from stone, but none found their mark. Colt ducked low, shielding Samuel with his body as the horse thundered into the open night. Behind them, the warriors charged, a tide of fury sweeping Boone's men aside like driftwood. The town square was chaos. Lanterns lay shattered, fires licking at the edges of buildings. Boone stumbled into the street, clutching his rifle with his uninjured hand, his face twisted with rage. He fired, the shot echoing sharp and desperate, but the bullet went wide. Colt didn't look back. He rode hard, Samuel clinging to him. The sound of hooves all around as the warriors overtook them, their chants rising like thunder rolling across the plains. Only when they had left the town behind, when the lights had faded to a faint glow on the horizon, did the riders slow. They drew up in a circle beneath the stars, the night vast and endless above them. Colt reined in, breath ragged, his chest heaving. Samuel slid from the saddle, legs weak, nearly collapsing into the dirt. One of the warriors dismounted and lifted the boy with surprising gentleness, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. The scarred leader dismounted last. He approached Colt, his eyes sharp, measuring the cowboy with a silence that stretched long. At last, he spoke. "You risked your life for him," the warrior said. "Not for money, not for glory. Why?" Colt met his gaze. His voice was tired, low but unshaken. "Because no man should be sold. Not while I've got breath left to stop it." The warrior studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. Your name will be spoken tonight, not just among us, but across this county. They will remember the one who broke the auction." Samuel's voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "He saved me." The boy's words hung in the air, fragile and powerful all at once. The warriors bowed their heads briefly, a gesture of respect. Boone might have claimed the town, the law, the gallows, but respect was a currency he had never owned. Colt exhaled, shoulders heavy. He looked back toward the faint glow of the town, where Boone's shouts still echoed in memory. The sheriff wasn't finished, not by a long stretch. Men like him didn't crawl away to lick their wounds. They came back, meaner than before. But tonight, the auction was ashes. Tonight, Samuel was free. And that counted for something. The scarred warrior spoke again. "Come, rest with us until dawn. By morning, the story will ride faster than the wind. Boone will curse your name, but the people, they will whisper it like a prayer." Colt gave a faint, humorless smile. "Let him curse. I never aimed to be liked." But deep down, he knew things had changed. In a world where most turned their eyes away, where men with guns and badges sold children like cattle, he had made a stand. It would not be forgotten. Not by the boy who clung to him in terror. Not by the tribes who had watched, silent until the moment came. And not by the county, where rumor already began to spread like wildfire. As dawn broke over the plains, the first light spilling across the horizon, riders carried the tale to every farm, every settlement, every saloon. They told of the auction interrupted, of the boy saved, of the sheriff humiliated. And at the heart of it all was the cowboy, the one who had taken down an auction with nothing but a revolver, grit, and the will to stand when no one else dared. By the time the sun climbed high, his name was everywhere. Some spoke it with admiration, others with fear. But all spoke it. Colt McAllister. The cowboy who stood against the auction. The man whose name spread across the county in a single night. Kindness can be dangerous. It can cost a man everything or give him more than he ever dreamed. Jacob Holloway's choice to lift a stranger from the dust changed not only his life, but the fate of an entire valley. What about you? What would you risk for a stranger? What battles would you fight for something bigger than yourself? If this story struck a chord, share it with someone who believes in honor, loyalty, and the price of standing your ground. And remember, sometimes the smallest gesture can turn the tide of destiny.